She stood near the last aisle of the small store, holding a plastic basket that felt heavier than it really was. Inside were only a few things: a small loaf of bread, a packet of rice, one can of beans, nothing more. The lights above flickered softly, and the air smelled of dust, soap, and old shelves. It was late afternoon, the time when the store was quiet and slow. Her child stood close to her side, holding a small toy in both hands. It was a cheap toy, bright in color, made of light plastic. It had been hanging near the counter, meant to catch a child's eye, and it had done exactly that. The child's face was full of joy, the kind of joy that comes easily when you are young and still believe the world is kind. The mother watched that, smile, and felt something tight in her chest. She did not smile back right away. Instead, her eyes moved to the basket, then to her pocket. She already knew what was inside her pocket. A few coins. Folded bills that were worn thin from being counted too many times. Not enough. She gently touched the toy with her fingers. It was light, almost weightless, but to her it felt heavier than anything else in the store. She knew the price without looking. She had already looked earlier. She had counted and counted again. If she bought the toy, there would not be enough food. If she bought the food, the toy had to stay. The child looked up at her and lifted the toy a little higher, as if to show it again. No words were needed. The smile said everything. The mother took a slow breath. She turned the toy over, pretending to examine it, buying herself a few seconds. Her mind raced, but the answer did not change. She knelt down so she was eye level with the child. Her voice was calm, soft, careful. She said they could not get the toy today. Maybe another day. She said it gently, like a promise, though she did not know when that day would come. The smile faded just a little. Not into tears. Not into anger. Just quiet disappointment. The child nodded and hugged the toy one last time before handing it back. That simple act hurt more than any loud cry would have. The mother stood and walked back to the shelf. She placed the toy exactly where she found it, making sure it was neat, like it mattered. As she did, her eyes burned. She blinked fast and swallowed. She would not cry here. Not now. She picked up the basket again and walked toward the counter. Each step felt slow. The cashier barely looked up, tired from a long day. The sound of items being scanned filled the quiet space. Beep, beep. Each sound felt like time. Running out. While the cashier rang up the items, the mother stared at the counter. She kept her face still. She did not want pity. She did not want questions. She only wanted to leave with what she needed. Behind her, two people waited in line. They were talking quietly, not really paying attention. But one of them had seen her at the shelf, had seen the toy, had seen the child's face change. The moment stayed in their mind. The total came up on the small screen. The number was just a little higher than what she had. Her heart skipped. She quickly removed the can of beans and slid it aside. The cashier nodded without comment and adjusted the total. Now it fit. Barely she paid, gathering the coins carefully, placing them one by one into the cashier's hand. Her hands shook, just a little. When it was done, her pocket was almost empty. She took the small bag and thanked the cashier. Her voice was quiet but steady. She took her child's hand and walked out of the store. Outside, the air was cooler. The sky was turning soft orange as the sun began to lower. She paused for a moment, letting the light touch her face. She did not know why, but she needed that pause. Just a second to breathe. They began the walk home. It was not far, but it felt long. The bag swung lightly in her hand. Too light. She knew how little was inside. She knew how many days it had to stretch. As they walked, her mind drifted. Not to dreams, but to memories. A time when she did not have to count every coin. A time when buying a small toy would not mean losing a meal. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. She pushed them away. Looking back did not help. She focused on the sound of her child's steps, the small rhythm beside her. That sound reminded her why she kept going. When they reached home, she unlocked the door to a small room that barely felt like a home. The walls were thin. The furniture was old, but it was clean. She took pride in that. Even when she had little, she kept what she had in order. She put the food away carefully, planning meals in her head. She already knew she would eat less so her child could eat more. It was not a choice anymore. It was routine. That evening, she cooked the rice and beans together. The smell filled the room. It was simple food, but warm. She served a full plate to her child and a smaller one to herself. When the child was not looking, she moved some food from her plate to the other. They ate quietly. The child talked about small things. About a bird seen earlier, about a funny shape in the clouds. The mother listened, smiling at the right moments, nodding, responding softly. She hid her hunger well. She always did. Later, when it was time for bed, she tucked the child in carefully. She smoothed the hair back and kissed the forehead. The child asked about the toy again, not with sadness, just curiosity. She smiled and said, "Maybe soon." She hoped her voice did not give her away. When the room grew quiet, she sat alone at the small table. The hunger hit harder then. Her stomach tightened, but she ignored it. She leaned her head into her hands and closed her eyes. She did not pray loudly. She did not ask for big things. She simply hoped. Hoped for a better day. Hoped for strength. Hoped that her child would never feel the weight she carried. Across town, one of the people from the store sat at their own table, unable to forget the image of a small hand letting go of a toy. It stayed with them. It felt important, though they did not yet know why. That night, as the mother lay down, her body tired and her mind restless, she thought again of the toy. Not because she wanted it, but because of what it represented. A small piece of joy she could not give. And that hurt more than hunger ever could. She fell asleep telling herself tomorrow would be better. She had to believe that. Because belief was the one thing she still had enough of. The next morning began quietly in the small apartment. The mother woke before her child, as she always did. Stretching and listening to the soft sounds of the city waking up outside the window, she moved slowly, careful not to disturb the little one who was still sleeping. Her body ached in ways it never had before, and her stomach reminded her gently that there was very little to eat. She went to the small kitchen, opening the cupboard and looking inside. Mostly empty. A few grains of rice left, a small bottle of oil, and some dried beans. She counted them quickly in her head. Enough for a single meal for both if she planned carefully. She cleaned the small counter, washed a few dishes, and set a pot on the stove. The water began to warm, and she added the rice. Watching it slowly expand in the heat, she looked at the child sleeping peacefully, the small chest rising and falling. The sight gave her strength. Despite the hunger gnawing at her, despite the worry and the fear, she felt a small spark of hope. Her child's happiness was worth more than anything else. Breakfast was quiet. She served the rice carefully, placing a slightly larger portion on the child's plate. She ate the smallest portion herself, pretending it was enough, even when her stomach ached. After the meal, she cleaned up quickly, washing the dishes and putting everything back in order. The apartment was modest, but she had always believed that neatness could make a place feel safer, warmer, even if there was little food and less comfort. After breakfast, she took the child by the hand and went outside. The streets were busy with people rushing to work, children heading to school, and vendors setting up their small stalls. She tried to keep her mind focused on the steps ahead, on the errands she had to run, but it was hard. Hunger made thinking heavier, sharper. Every little noise, every little bump or shout in the street seemed louder than it really was. The child skipped alongside her, talking about the shapes of clouds, about a bird that flew overhead, and about the possibility of seeing a small cat near the alley. The mother smiled quietly, nodding, responding softly. She wanted to protect this innocence, this joy, even if she had to hide her own pain to do it. They stopped at a small bakery, one that sold bread cheaply. She bought a loaf, spending nearly all the coins she had. As she did, she noticed the people inside the shop watching her. Not with pity exactly, but with curiosity. She ignored them. She had grown used to being observed. She had learned to protect her dignity, even when there was nothing left to protect. Walking back home, she carried the bread carefully. Every step reminded her that there was still a life to keep together, that her child's safety, health, and happiness depended on her choices. She remembered the toy from the store the day before. She forced herself not to think too much about it. Thinking of it only made the ache sharper, not just in her stomach, but in her chest. Back at home, she prepared another simple meal, saving a small portion for later. She divided everything carefully, rationing as if it were gold. Afterward, she sat at the small table and thought. She thought about how her life had changed so suddenly, how the job loss had come, how the bills had piled up, and how the support she once had seemed to vanish into thin air. She did not cry, not yet. Crying felt like a luxury she could not afford. Instead, she planned each day carefully, thinking about how to stretch the food, how to find work, how to make small things last longer. Each decision felt enormous, and yet she made them with quiet determination. She had to. There was no one else. The afternoon came slowly. She watched the child play with small improvised toys. A wooden spoon, a scrap of paper, a bottle cap. The imagination of a child made magic out of nothing. She smiled at this, feeling a mixture of pride and sorrow. Pride for the child's creativity, sorrow for the life she could not yet give. She wondered if someday the child would understand. Someday the child would know how much had been sacrificed silently. Evening came, and she prepared another small meal. By now, hunger pressed harder on her, but she kept a steady face, giving the child a full plate while taking a smaller portion herself. She had learned to hide the pain, to eat just enough to keep going, to preserve strength for the moments that truly mattered. After the meal, she cleaned the apartment again, washing dishes and putting everything in order. She looked at the small toy she had hidden in a corner. Not the one from the store, just a broken piece of plastic the child had picked up elsewhere. It was not much, but it brought a smile to the child's face. That was enough for now. As night fell, she read a small book to the child, using the little light they had. She made up voices for the characters, making the story lively. The child laughed quietly, unaware of the deeper struggles of the day. She listened to the soft breathing when the child fell asleep, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The child was safe, warm, fed, and loved. That was everything. Once the apartment was quiet, she sat again at the small table. The hunger was sharp, and the worry lingered, but she allowed herself a moment to breathe. She thought about the small acts of kindness she had seen in the world, fleeting glimpses of goodness, a smile from a neighbor, a door held open, a small gesture that mattered more than anyone realized. She wondered if such kindness could find its way to her. Someone might see, truly see, the quiet struggle she endured. Her mind wandered to the toy once more, not in desire, but as a symbol. It represented small happiness, a gift she could not give, and yet hoped someday too. She knew that the smallest things often carried the most weight, that a tiny act could hold more meaning than a grand gesture. She made a promise to herself silently. She would keep going. For the child. For the small spark of hope that still existed, even in a life so full of challenges. She would endure hunger, she would endure fear, she would endure the quiet weight of her days. Because there was love here, a love that could not be measured by coins or meals or toys. It was stronger than any hardship. And as she lay down that night, listening to the soft hum of the city outside, she allowed herself a small, cautious hope. Perhaps tomorrow would bring something different. Perhaps tomorrow would bring a kindness she could not yet imagine. Perhaps in some quiet corner of the world, someone was watching, noticing, ready to help in a way that could change everything. With that thought, she drifted into sleep, carrying the small, quiet determination that had always kept her going. The child slept beside her, unaware of the silent struggles, the choices, and the sacrifices. But the mother knew that every hardship endured, every small victory claimed was for this very moment, for this very life that depended on her love and strength the next day. The mother woke with the same quiet determination she had carried each morning. Her body ached, her stomach reminded her gently that food was scarce, but she moved with purpose. She dressed the child, packed the small bag with what little food remained, and stepped outside into the soft morning light. The city streets were alive with movement. The sounds of people talking, cars passing, and distant laughter mixing with the clatter of daily life. She walked with her child along familiar streets, passing the same corners, the same small shops, the same faces. She knew most of the vendors and shopkeepers by sight, many nodding politely, but never stopping. Life had a rhythm she had come to recognize, a rhythm that often felt indifferent to the struggles of those like her. At the corner of a busy street, she noticed something unusual. A small group of people were gathered near a bench, whispering quietly among themselves, glancing around as if waiting for something. One of them caught her eye, and for a moment it seemed as if recognition passed between them. She looked away quickly, not wanting to engage. She had learned long ago that it was safer to move through the world unnoticed, to keep dignity intact even when it came at the cost of isolation. The child tugged at her hand, pointing to a small bird hopping along the edge of the pavement. She smiled faintly, following the child's gaze. The small moments of joy were precious, rare treasures in a life filled with careful calculation and quiet endurance. As they moved along, she thought again about the toy from the store. The memory of her child holding it, the way the eyes had lit up, stayed with her. She tried not to dwell on it, knowing that longing alone could not change their reality. Instead, she focused on the practicalities of the day, finding a few small errands, making sure food would last another day, and keeping the child's spirits high at the local market. She carefully selected a few vegetables, choosing only what was necessary, calculating how much could be bought with the few coins she had. A woman nearby noticed her, nodding with a small smile, as if recognizing the effort it took to make these decisions. The mother offered a polite nod back but did not stop to talk. Conversation, however kind, often led to pity. Pity was something she had learned to avoid. When she returned home, the small acts of kindness began. A neighbor she barely knew had left a small bag of groceries by her door. Inside were potatoes, carrots, and a loaf of bread. There was no note, no message, just the silent gift. Her heart skipped a little, and she felt tears welling up. She quickly wiped them away, knowing the child might notice. The child, curious, asked who had left the food. She smiled and said it was someone who wanted to help. The child's eyes sparkled with interest, and she felt a warmth she had not felt in weeks. Small kindnesses could shift the heaviness of a day, could make the world feel less cruel. That afternoon, as she prepared a meal, there was another surprise. At the edge of the small park nearby, a stranger approached with a small toy, bright and cheerful. It's very similar to the one her child had wanted. She took it carefully, unsure how to react, and the stranger simply smiled before walking away, disappearing into the crowd. The child's laughter filled the apartment as they played with it, and the mother felt something she had not felt in a long time: relief. And a fragile hope. She thought about the people who had started to notice her, the strangers who had acted without expectation of reward or recognition. Each small act of kindness reminded her that the world was not entirely indifferent, that there were still people willing to help quietly. Thoughtfully over the next few days, these acts continued. A meal left at the door, a warm coat on a chilly morning, a few coins slipped into her bag when she was not looking. Each act built upon the last, a quiet network of support that she had not asked for, but that she received with gratitude and humility. Her child noticed the changes. The laughter returned more easily, the small games lasted longer, and the world seemed slightly brighter. She watched the child play and learned again the power of small joys. It was not wealth that mattered, not comfort or ease, but the feeling of safety, of being seen, of being cared for. Evening came, and she prepared another simple meal, sharing it with the child. The small apartment was filled with warmth and the sound of laughter. The toy sat on the table, a symbol of hope, of the tiny miracles that kindness could bring. She realized that while her struggles were not over, the world had offered a hand, quietly and without demand. And that was enough to carry her forward. She spent the night planning, organizing, and thinking about the future. The small kindnesses she had received gave her courage. She began to imagine a day when she could give back, when she could extend the same quiet support to others in need. For the first time in a long time, the future seemed possible, not just something to endure. When the apartment fell silent, she sat by the small window, looking at the city lights. She thought about the strangers, about the small miracles of attention and care. She understood that kindness could arrive in many forms, often unseen, often quiet, but powerful enough to change a life. As she lay down that night, the child asleep beside her, she allowed herself to dream a little, not of wealth, not of a life without struggle, but of a life filled with small moments of joy, of quiet support, and of hope that no matter how hard the days became, there were still people who could make a difference. And as she drifted into sleep, she held on to that thought, that even in the darkest moments, even when hunger pressed and hope seemed distant, there was the possibility of a miracle. A small act, a quiet hand, a stranger who noticed and cared. That was enough to keep her going, enough to keep her heart open, enough to teach her child that even in hardship, there was goodness in the world. The next morning arrived with a quiet promise. Sunlight spilled into the small apartment, painting the walls with soft gold. The mother woke early as she always did, but this time she carried a light in her heart that she had not felt in months. There was still worry, still the ache of hunger, still the weight of uncertainty, but the small miracles of the past days had opened a crack in the heavy darkness. She dressed the child, packed the remaining food, and stepped outside. The air was crisp and fresh, carrying the faint smell of flowers from a nearby park. As they walked to the market, the mother noticed more familiar faces smiling kindly. A shopkeeper she had often passed now waved and offered a small bag of fresh vegetables without charge. She hesitated at first, overwhelmed by the unexpected generosity, but accepted it with a soft, grateful nod. The child's eyes widened, curiosity sparkling. The mother smiled. Realizing that these small gestures were beginning to reshape their world, they continued their day, visiting places they usually avoided because of tight budgets and long walks. Today felt different. There was a lightness in her steps, a quiet reassurance that perhaps life could be kinder than it had been. They stopped by a small bakery, and the mother was able to buy a loaf of bread and a small treat for the child. The child laughed quietly, holding the treat carefully, savoring the moment. The mother felt her heart swell. It was not much, but it was enough. At the park they encountered a woman sitting on a bench, quietly observing. She waved and gestured for them to come closer. Hesitant at first, the mother approached cautiously, not knowing what to expect. The woman smiled warmly, offering a small envelope. Inside were some bills, enough to cover several days of food. The mother could hardly believe it. Her eyes filled with tears, but she held them back. The child tugged at her hand, sensing the mother's emotion but not understanding it fully. She smiled brightly, unaware of the weight behind that smile. The mother thanked the woman softly, her voice shaking. The woman simply nodded, saying, "Take care of each other." No one watched them afterward. No one demanded thanks or explanation. It was a gift given quietly, generously, without expectation. The mother walked away feeling as if the world had shifted just a little. The heavy burden made lighter by unseen hands. Back home, she carefully planned meals for the next days, rationing the food wisely while ensuring her child had plenty. The toy that had been gifted days ago sat nearby, a bright reminder of hope and joy. The child played happily, laughing freely, while the mother felt a warmth she had almost forgotten existed. She could finally breathe even just a little, knowing that help had arrived in ways she could not have imagined. In the evening, more surprises came. Another neighbor, someone who had seen her struggle from across the street, quietly left a warm meal at her door. She opened it carefully, the smell filling the apartment, the warmth seeping into her tired bones. The child was delighted, asking if they could share it now. They sat together, eating, laughing softly, and for the first time in many nights. The mother felt a sense of relief that went beyond hunger. It was the feeling of safety, of support, of being seen and cared for. As night fell, she sat by the window, thinking about how everything had changed in a few short days. The kindness of strangers had brought miracles into their lives. not in grand gestures but in small, thoughtful acts that had piled up to create hope. She realized that even the darkest moments could be touched by goodness, if only someone noticed, if only someone reached out. She thought about how she would one day return this kindness, how she would pass it on quietly the way it had come to her. The child lay asleep beside her, holding the small toy tightly, dreaming in innocence. The mother watched, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. She understood now that life could be unpredictable, harsh, and challenging, but it could also be generous, gentle, and miraculous. She whispered a quiet promise to herself that she would not forget, that she would keep going, and that she would never stop believing in the small miracles that kindness could bring. Later, after the child had fallen into deep sleep, the mother organized the small apartment. She arranged the food, tidied the living space, and looked at the toy once more. It seemed to glow in the soft light, a symbol of what had been lost and what had been found. She sat quietly, feeling both exhaustion and deep peace. The miracle had arrived, not as a sudden change, but as a series of quiet, thoughtful acts that had grown into hope. She thought about the people who had helped, the strangers who had noticed and acted. Their identities were unimportant. What mattered was the impact of their actions, the way small gestures could alter a life. She hoped that one day she would be able to offer the same, to become part of this quiet network of care and kindness that had saved them. The mother finally lay down beside her child, holding the small toy gently, feeling the warmth of the day linger in her heart. She closed her eyes, letting herself rest, letting herself hope, knowing that even in a world full of struggle, there was room for kindness, miracles, and new beginnings. The night was calm, and for the first time in a long while, she slept with a sense of peace, ready to face tomorrow with renewed courage. Knowing that she was not alone, and that the world could still be a place of gentle miracles. The next morning, the mother woke to a soft light spilling into the small apartment. The air smelled faintly of the city waking up, mixed with the aroma of the bread she had bought the day before. She felt a quiet peace settle over her, a sense that life was shifting in subtle ways. She dressed the child, prepared a small breakfast, and set out into the streets. Today felt different, not because the world had changed, but because she had begun to see the possibilities in it as they walked. She noticed that the faces around them seemed warmer, friendlier. People nodded, smiled, or offered a kind word. She knew it was not magic. It was a ripple of kindness, spreading quietly through the small gestures of strangers who had noticed her struggle and had acted. Each interaction reminded her that life, even in hardship, could hold moments of unexpected generosity. At the park, they encountered children playing with toys she could never afford. The child looked longingly, but she knelt and whispered softly, encouraging imagination over possession. The toy they had been given days ago sat in the child's hands, and she watched with relief as it brought joy. Small happiness mattered more than any store-bought item could. She realized that teaching her child to find joy in simple things was a gift no one could take away. Later, as they returned home, she found a small package at the door. Inside were more groceries, carefully wrapped, and a note that simply said, "We are glad to help. Keep going." She smiled quietly, tears welling up, but held back. The weight of worry lifted slightly with each act of kindness. She felt a connection to people she had never met, a network of quiet support that she had not expected. But that changed everything. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of their life began to stabilize. She found small work through a local friend who had noticed her dedication and honesty. The income was not much, but it allowed her to plan meals, pay a few bills, and offer her child a stable home. Each day was still filled with challenges, but the constant threat of hunger and despair had eased. Hope had taken root. The child thrived in this environment, laughing, learning, and exploring. The mother watched with pride, knowing that the small miracles of kindness had allowed this joy to return. She taught the child that life could be hard, yes, but that it could also be beautiful, filled with generosity, love, and small victories. Each moment of laughter was a triumph, each smile a reward for endurance and patience. One afternoon, a neighbor invited them over for tea. The mother hesitated, but the child's excitement was contagious. They went, in the warmth of the home, the kindness of the hosts, and the simple joy of shared food reminded her that community could be a lifeline. She realized that giving and receiving kindness did not diminish pride, but rather strengthened it. The network that had quietly grown around her was more than support. It was a lesson in human goodness. Months passed, and she began to repay these quiet gifts in her own way. She helped a struggling mother in the market, offered her child small toys to children who had none, and shared meals with neighbors in need. She did not announce it. She did it quietly, the way help had come to her. Each act of giving felt like closing a circle, a way to honor the kindness that had sustained them. One evening, as the city lights blinked on and the apartment filled with the soft warmth of their small home, the mother looked at the toy once more. It had been a gift from strangers, a symbol of hope, a reminder that small acts could ripple outward. The child played with it now, creating stories and adventures unaware of the weight it once carried. The mother smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. Life had not been easy, but the love she gave and received created a world of miracles in its own quiet way. She thought of all the people who had helped them, all the unseen hands that had lifted them out of despair. Their names were unknown, their faces mostly forgotten, but their impact was lasting. She whispered a quiet thank you to the world, to the strangers, and to the small spark of hope that had carried her through the darkest days. When the check finally came, they handed over the payment without comment. The usual hasty exit filled with chatter and laughter did not happen. Instead, they stood, paused, and nodded slightly, toward the waiter, a silent acknowledgement of respect and understanding. It was a quiet gesture, but it carried weight far greater than any words they could have spoken in arrogance. The waiter accepted the nod with a simple nod in return, his expression calm and collected. He had not demanded recognition or praise. He had simply been honest and dignified, and the acknowledgement that came was genuine, earned, and unspoken. After the group left, the waiter returned to the kitchen to finish his shift. His colleagues gave subtle nods, acknowledging the way he had handled the situation. The manager, who had observed quietly, gave a slight smile, understanding that the true lesson had not been about service or efficiency, but about character, patience, and respect. The restaurant settled into a quieter rhythm for the remainder of the night. The diners who remained continued their meals with a sense of calm and appreciation. The encounter with the group had served as a reminder of the power of dignity, honesty, and quiet strength. It had shown that even when faced with mockery and arrogance, remaining true to one's values and speaking the truth could transform the energy in a room and leave a lasting impression. As the waiter prepared to close his station, he reflected on the night. It faced humiliation, handled it with integrity, and shared his truth in a way that changed hearts and minds. The group had been confronted with their assumptions and had experienced a moment of clarity and reflection. It was a quiet victory, not loud or celebrated, but profound in its impact. The lesson of the evening was clear. Respect, honesty, and dignity could silence mockery and arrogance without anger or confrontation. True strength was not in dominance, but in calm, truthful presence. And in that moment, the waiter had shown everyone in the room the quiet power of integrity and the importance of seeing the humanity in every person. Regardless of their role or station in life, the restaurant was quieter now, the evening rush finally over, but the memory of the earlier encounter lingered in the air. The group that had tried to humiliate the waiter had left, but their presence and the lesson they had received remained in the minds of the diners who had witnessed it. The waiter continued moving through the tables, clearing dishes, refilling drinks, and attending to the few remaining customers with the same calm, steady demeanor he had shown throughout the night. As he worked, he reflected quietly on what had happened. The laughter, the mockery, the pointed comments, they had all been designed to make him falter. But he had remained composed, had chosen honesty over anger, dignity over resentment. And in doing so, he had not only defended his own self-respect, but also taught a lesson in humility and understanding. This was not a lesson he had intended to make dramatic or public. He had simply spoken truth, and the power of truth had a way of settling hearts and minds that no sarcasm or insult could challenge. The staff watched him with quiet admiration. They had seen him in difficult situations before, but tonight had been exceptional. The way he had handled a table determined to humiliate him with a calm, honest, and human approach was inspiring. Even the manager, who had been busy with other responsibilities, gave a subtle nod of approval. Recognizing the impact of his employees' composure and integrity, outside the restaurant, the night had grown colder and the streets were quieter. Inside, the remaining diners were still speaking softly, reflecting on the moments they had witnessed. Some spoke in whispers to each other, remarking on the courage it took to maintain dignity in the face of deliberate humiliation. Their thoughts quietly with staff, expressing respect and admiration for the way the waiter had handled the situation. Meanwhile, the group that had tried to belittle him was driving away in silence. They had entered the restaurant full of confidence, expecting to dominate and leave with a sense of superiority. Instead, they had been confronted with a perspective they had never considered. They had been reminded that every person has a story, responsibilities, and dignity that cannot be judged by appearances alone. And the quiet, unshakable honesty of the waiter had silenced their arrogance. One of them finally broke the silence. "I can't believe I acted that way," they said softly. "I feel ashamed. I didn't see what I was doing. I thought it was just a joke, but it wasn't. Not even close." Another nodded in agreement. "I feel the same." He stayed calm. He didn't yell, didn't insult us back. He just spoke the truth, and it's clear he lives by it. We should have treated him with respect from the start." They spoke quietly, trying to process the realization. The arrogance and confidence they had relied on earlier were gone. What remained was reflection, understanding, and a new sense of humility. They had been reminded that true strength is not in mockery or belittlement, but in honesty, patience, and respect for others. Back inside the restaurant, the waiter continued, his work moving from table to table with the same steady presence. He greeted customers, refilled glasses, and cleared plates with the same care he had always shown. His calm demeanor and integrity had not only silenced the table that sought to humiliate him, but had also inspired everyone who had observed the situation. As he prepared to close his station for the night, he looked around the restaurant. The dishes were cleared, the tables wiped, and the few remaining customers were finishing their meals quietly. There was a sense of peace in the room, a quiet reflection of the lesson that had unfolded. The waiter took a moment to straighten his apron and take a deep breath, feeling the calm satisfaction of having faced a challenge with dignity and honesty. He thought about the group that had tried to belittle him. Their mockery had been loud, confident, and deliberate, but it had also been an opportunity. An opportunity to demonstrate the power of truth, patience, and respect. And in that opportunity, he had not only preserved his own dignity, but had also left an impression on everyone who had witnessed the encounter. The other diners began to leave, offering polite thanks to the waiter as they exited. Some expressed admiration for the way he had handled the situation, and others simply nodded in quiet respect. Each acknowledgement, small as it was, reinforced the impact of his calm and honest approach. The waiter cleaned his final table and stored the last of the dishes. He paused for a moment, reflecting on the events of the evening. He had faced humiliation, mockery, and judgment, yet he had remained composed and true to himself. He had spoken his truth calmly and honestly, and in doing so, he had changed the energy in the room. The group that had sought to belittle him had left with a newfound understanding. Now the other diners had witnessed the power of dignity and integrity in action. As he turned off the lights and prepared to leave, he thought about the larger lesson of the evening. Life often places people in situations where they are judged unfairly or treated with disrespect. In those moments, the choice is whether to respond with anger, defensiveness, or patience and honesty. The path of patience and truth, though sometimes quieter and less immediate in its impact, ultimately leaves a stronger impression and demonstrates the strength of character. The waiter stepped out into the night, the cool air brushing against his face. He walked home slowly, reflecting on the events of the evening. The lesson was clear: respect, patience, And honesty can transform moments of humiliation into moments of reflection, understanding, and growth. It is not the loudest voice or the sharpest insult that commands attention, but the calm presence of someone who speaks truth with dignity and integrity. He arrived home and greeted his family, carrying with him the quiet satisfaction of having faced a challenge and emerged with dignity intact. The events of the evening were not about triumph over others, but about the quiet power of truth and integrity in the face of adversity. And in that quiet power, he found not just personal strength, but the ability to influence hearts and minds, leaving an impact that extended far beyond the walls of the restaurant. The story of that evening would remain with the diners who had witnessed it. The group who had tried to humiliate him, and the waiter himself, was a reminder that every person has a story, a struggle, and a dignity that deserves respect. That evening, a lesson in humility, honesty, and the quiet strength of character had been shared. Its effects would linger long after the last customer had left and the lights had gone out.